Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to WeatherBrains episode 666. Ooh. Yes, the weekly show all about weather. This is the pre-show, the magical time where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we occasionally say outrageous things. So here we are, 13 minutes before airtime, and I'm the only guy here. Well, this could be the best or the worst. So we have on as our guest this week, Joe Bastardi of WeatherBell. And Joe always makes for an interesting guest. So if you are just firing up the browser, the app, however you're watching, just hang tight. Just strap in for a wild ride here. So let me see if I can get Joe here. I know Kevin's coming tonight. That'll be good. Kevin has not been on the show with us recently, and we look forward to having him back. So I'm going to invite Joe, and let's see if by chance this one works. And if you're a longtime viewer or listener, then you know that we often have challenges getting our guests on the Hangouts, but that's okay. That's what makes the pre-show special. Had a really, really good show last week. In fact, I'm going to probably go back and listen to that one more time. It was a little long. I think it ran over 2 hours, but it was a Mega Michael special. We had some really interesting guests from various perspectives involving Hurricane Michael on the Gulf Coast. So that's going to be slightly awesome. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Joe, you the man.
Let me get in my office over here. It took me about 3 hours to figure out how to answer it. And the screaming you may hear in the background will be my guinea pigs because.
Wow. All right. Awesome. Joe, you're looking good. You're sounding good. How did you wind up with guinea pigs? What's the story with that?
Well, I had them when I was a kid, for one. But then when my daughter came into our lives, she quickly picked up at about the age of 5 that Daddy likes little cuddly animals. So we had 2 guinea pigs then. It was Roxy and Sam. And these two, Benito and Augustus, they're named after great Italian leaders. So my daughter, what happens is my wife will leave town and my daughter convinces me to get various things like my bear costume, my guinea pigs. So that's what usually happens. By the way, I'm sorry I'm dressed up like this. I was just got through, work at. I was working because the European comes in and all the energy companies want to take a look at that. And then I see you're in a tie and I'm like,
well, it's a job issue here. I mean, I still am paid basically to do weather on television. So,
right.
And if I was not, I would be in a t-shirt and cargo shorts. That's my standard attire.
I understand. But
so. I just have to do this. So it is what it is. In fact, tomorrow night, I will not be wearing this because guess, Joe, where I will be tomorrow night.
Well, I'll be in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I don't think you're going to be there. I didn't see you on the list. So where are you going to be?
I will be in Boston at Fenway for Game 1 of the World Series. So I will not be in this attire, trust me. Although they have asked me to do a live shot in the 6 o'clock sports here on Skype. So I guess I better have some pants on. But actually, it's going to be so cold, I need to have some pants on. It's going to be like 40s for that game.
Bring that up because I was born in Rhode Island and lived there first 5 years of my life. And my dad was a huge Yankees fan, but he loved Ted Williams, right? And my mother was a Red Sox fan. So I like the Yankees first, but I also like the Red Sox, which is kind of weird. And it's like, growing up when we moved to South Jersey, I became a Phillies fan. But living out here for how many years? 40 years almost. 40 years. I like the Pirates and I like the Steelers too, and I like the Eagles. So I'm one of these guys that I love everybody. I'm such a man of peace. I'm like the Hakaways. We love everybody.
I have never heard anybody come on this show and say they love the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Well, I like the Red Sox second, but I'd always like to see the Yankees and Red Sox squaring off against each other. And it's just amazing. It's amazing if you just simply, Roger Clemens was a legend when he was with the Red Sox, and then he switches uniforms, everybody screams and yells at him, So it's all about the uniform. That's all it's about. Doesn't matter the other stuff.
Well, it's again, the deal with me, both boys played baseball, but the youngest one kept on playing. And
Right.
When he was 12, we took them to play in a tournament at Cooperstown. And that's what most young guys do that play baseball. They play that tournament up there when they're 12. And at the end of the tournament, we told them, you can either go watch a game at Yankee Stadium or at Fenway, because both were in town. The Mets were not playing. You got your choice, Yankees or Red Sox. We gave them a vote. They voted for Boston. So went to Boston, and Terry Francona was the manager back then.
Right.
This was in 2010. And I know Terry because he managed here. In fact, he managed Michael Jordan when Michael Jordan was here playing for our affiliate of the Chicago White Sox. And he would run through the neighborhood and we would talk. Anyway, he let us in early at Fenway, and we had a ball. And we just kind of fell in love with it. So since 2010, every year we go up there. And now that they're in this series, we just had to go. We had to go.
I would go to Yankee Stadium with a bunch of the guys that came in at AccuWeather. They were all from Southern New York State. And they went to Oneonta, I believe it was, and Al Conklin. And Al's on I believe, WBTV in Charlotte. And Al and I were really, really close friends. So whenever we had weekends off, we'd go over to the stadium and we'd sit in the right field bleachers with the bleacher creatures over there. And I had a blast for 2 or 3 years. Those guys got me through a rough time. I was going through a rough time in the late 80s. Had a situation where, had a practice wife. That's what I tell my wife. And when that split up, all these guys that were Yankees fans just simply said, come on, let's go to the stadium. And I must have seen 30 or 40 Yankees game in 1987 sitting in those right field bleachers, where they're not a very forgiving bunch in the right field bleachers at Yankee Stadium. And,
No.
there was Stan's, which is a sports bar across the street, which I don't know if you've ever been to the stadium. And this is like a monument. This is like a monument to Yankees baseball. I mean, they have baseball cards back there from Mickey Mantle all the way back to DiMaggio. And you sit there, and it's absolutely hysterical after the games going in there and just hanging out and understanding that, Yankees used to hang out in here. I'll tell you one more story that you have to get going. I mean, we have to start doing some weather. There's a restaurant in Cranston, Rhode Island called Lindy's. Okay, it's on Post Road, and it's just before you cross the Patuxent River. And whenever the Yankees were in town against the Red Sox, Joe D and Ted Williams on Sunday after the ball game come down to Cranston, Rhode Island, and eat dinner at Lindy's, right? And I don't know if it's still there, but the story was that the Paterno boys, George and Joe, were at Brown, and they would save up all their money to try to get into Lindy's on a Sunday night so they could see DiMaggio and Ted Williams.
Wow. What year was that, Joe?
That's back at in the 1940s sometime when Joe was
had to be. Yeah.
They were the Gold Dust twins, those two. That's what they called them in the backfield at Brown. Neither one could run or pass, but they could win, and I guess that was important. But DiMaggio and Williams were good friends, and DiMaggio's brothers were great. Dom and Vinny were great ball players too. And I think that one of them played for the Red Sox. So
wow. That's awesome. So, one of the great baseball trivia questions, who is the last Major League Baseball player to bat over 400 in a season?
That's Ted
Williams. Ted Williams. Hey, look who's here. Kevin is here. Kevin, welcome. Can you hear us?
This show has really changed since the last time I was here.
What's amazing
Welcome
about
to baseball brains.
Remember,
I'm a little confused.
Williams was a fighter pilot too in Korea. I mean, he lost some years. He lost some years in the war, and I believe he was a fighter pilot. I mean, he was quite a person. I guess they don't make him. Actually, they do. You got Mike Trout, very similar to that old school stuff, and he's a weather nut, right? Mike Trout.
Yeah, we're trying to get him on this show. We need to get him on the show.
I Twitter him. I talked to. I'm better friends with his dad. His dad's a complete weather nut, and we're all South Jersey boys. And my big thing was I was pitching against Millville when they were #1 in the state, and that's Trout's high school. But this is back in the '70s, and I had those guys beat. And what happened was a thunderstorm hit after the first inning, and the air got very humid, and the wind was in my face. And these guys couldn't hit a fastball. I struck out 15 guys on this big looping curveball with the wind in my face. And you got to the bottom of the 7th, we had tied the game, and I struck the first 2 guys out. Third guy caught up with me, hit a triple. So I'm holding him on, and I told the Trout boys this story. Right? I'm holding him on because you're throwing a slow curve. The guy's going to try to steal home. Hold him on. This giant bee comes at my head. I go to brush him away. I get called for a balk and lose.
Wow.
That's my baseball story against Millville High School.
Wow. That's like slightly awesome.
Sounds like Joe's going to help us get Mike Trout on.
I get him on the show.
You got to pile a lot of snow into South Jersey, but I have no shame in dropping games. Put it that way.
Oh yeah. All right. So we're coming up on 1 minute out here. We're going to join the TV
already.
Well, we are. We're streaming. We are streaming live, but the actual recorded show that's released to the world, the audio version, we'll start that here in a couple of minutes. We have to wait until 30 after the hour at 9:30. We hit local television. We're on TV on cable systems here in this market. So
now
we got 30.
What time you guys got shows at 11 o'clock, don't you?
Yes. So this show will be done tonight for sure by 11. It will be totally done.
Well, that's
on the air tonight.
At 10 Central, I may have to duck out a little early because our weekend guy's doing the Fox show. But
okay, cool. Well, great. So we're coming up on 10 seconds, and once we get the TV folks joined on board, we'll get the recorders going, and we'll get this booger started here. So, good evening to our friends watching on television. This is WeatherBrains. You know what time it is. It's Monday night, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern. We are about to start the show. Our guest is on. We are ready to roll. So what we're going to do here is hit the recorders. We rarely ever start this show on time. So we're actually going to try and do that this week. So here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains, episode number 666.
Oh wow!
Shocking.
I'm out.
Ooh, yeah, I'm about to say, yeah. So
good night, everyone.
Yeah, it's been nice talking to you. No, it's 6. We thought about just bumping the number up to 667, but hey, we're bold and daring here. So welcome. We know that
we ought to reclaim that number 6. When I lift, I always do reps of 7. I was telling the Penn State wrestling, one of my buddies is the associate head coach, Cody Sanderson. I said, I always do reps of 7 because that's God's number. He goes, well, we got to reclaim that number 6. So I don't want anybody fearing this show.
We are reclaiming the 6s for the good guys. So there you go. That the voice you heard is Joe Bastardi, and we'll bring on Joe here in just a second. But look who's back, Aubrey. Kevin.
I know. Can you believe it? I thought we scared him off.
Oh, that's happened many times.
Oh, I know. Usually it's not me.
For those that don't know this man, Kevin is a meteorologist in Wichita Falls, Texas for Chanel number 3, and you have been away. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. We've had a combination of things. Part of it was, we had a new weekend person, and he needed some training and some attention. But then in the middle of all that, I got a call from my dad one day. It was a Wednesday morning, and he said, "Hey, Kev, I'm in the hospital." And I went, "What?" And he was there for he had an incident the night before, and it was a medium level incident. But I said, "Hey, Dad, I'd love to come help you out." And he said, "No, no, no, no." And I called him again a little later, and he said, "No, no, no, no." And I called him a third time, and he said, "Well, if you want to." And so I jumped on a plane. And it turned from the medium level incident to a quadruple bypass. And so that was a little bit bigger of a deal. So I needed to be away for a while. And but he's coming back strong. And so I appreciate the time away and appreciate the opportunity to come back.
Well, goodness gracious. It's been an eventful series of weeks for you. So welcome back.
Yeah,
and Aubrey, it's always good to have you back. What edit booth are you in tonight?
I think I'm still in 4. I'm in 4.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
And
Kevin, glad that your dad's doing well.
Thank you. I appreciate that, as does he.
How old is your dad, Kevin?
He's 82. Every doctor that has come in contact with him, he had no symptoms. This is why it was so quickly. He had no symptoms of heart trouble. And every doctor that has come in contact with him says, well, what is it? They just can't believe the apparent discomfort that he went through and that he didn't feel worse. And his good health is helping him rebound very quickly. So, 82.
Wow. Well, let's bring in Joe Bastardi. For those that don't, everybody knows Joe. Joe is a world-renowned meteorologist, prognosticator, extended outlook guy, working in the private sector. Joe, did you ever work for NOAA at any point in your career?
No, my dad did, though. Well, he was a research meteorologist at Atlantic City for several years. And the base over there had a meteorology center. It was at that time, New York City was a forecast office. And there was a big research base there, and what Dad did was involved with developing the Mesonet network that they put up around airports back then, and also a lot of the fog lights on the runway were developed by that group at NAFEC. That was NAFEC back in the 1960s, and what my dad would do is he would go into the weather station, look at maps, and come home and tell me if he thought it was going to snow or whatever. He wasn't forecasting at the time. Graduated from A&M in '65, which explains why I love Bear Bryant and why it's like my third favorite team. But A&M and Penn State are tied for one. But in the meantime, he was the oldest freshman on the A&M campus. Went to school at 31, graduated at 35. We were all down there, and so he worked for the government for years. And when they wanted to, when his branch of the weather service was shutting down, he took a job as a mathematician programmer and got out of weather because, he had enough of shift work and things like that, and wanted to stay with his family. And he sacrificed a lot to pave the road for me. And that was great. Just having somebody all the time to talk to about the weather. It was amazing because, my son Garrett wants to be a meteorologist eventually. So he's on the other side. And of course, with the computer modeling the way it is now, it's like, he comes in from the other direction, from the younger direction. But, my dad still has fantastic instincts. Like he'll see something going on and call me up and say, are you worried about this or worried about that? And it's running counter to what you might be thinking, and those instincts with the folks that came before me, who were just unbelievably great forecasters. In fact, one of the things I always try to do is try to figure out what's going on without looking at the models first. That's vitally important to me, and to try to get. I've always wondered if I'm on an even playing field with the greats that came before me. And these people that have been lights in my life before me, no modeling, could I keep up with them as far as forecasting goes? Because some of these guys that were making forecasts back in the 60s and 70s, and they're just lights out.
Hey, Joe, you know what this makes me realize hearing about your dad, the great story about your dad? What I would like from you before we get too far is 100 words or less. Run your resume, you graduated from, and then what happened, just so we can put that all.
I graduated from Penn State in 1978 with the bachelor's in meteorology. And I was also on the wrestling team there, which was a very, very big deal because it really focused me and really reinforced the things my mom and dad taught me about work ethic, preparation, some of those things. And then I graduated March 4th, 1978. I was working 8 o'clock the next morning at AccuWeather. And I worked there, and it was a great, great place. We were the New York Yankees of weather forecasting back then. I mean, you had guys, and they were extremely competitive. The guys I worked with there, the best thing I could say about them, and it's an ultimate compliment, is if they wrestled, they would have been great wrestlers because they were like that in the weather. That's why that company came to the forefront so quickly the way it did. And so I worked there for 33 years, and then, you know, things started to diverge a little bit, and they diverged quite a bit into what I wanted to do. And it's certainly no grudge against them, but I had to go. It's always been about the weather with me. And it's you know, you get a big mouth and you got 400 people working, you can shoot your mouth off and affect a lot of other people. I felt that it was time for me to try to get into something where it was weather, and without having to worry about some of the other things. And again, if I were a kid growing up and I wanted to get a first job, and I would do the same thing over again. I mean, it's a great laboratory. You had the great. This is going over 100 words, but you know, you look at Joel Myers, Elliot Abrams, Joe Sobel, John Cosette, Ken Clark. These guys, it's like I'm walking into the lineup with the New York Yankees over here. We were talking about that earlier. So basically, I've worked. You know, the Bastardi's are blue collar people. We work one job. My dad worked one job for 40 years. My mother did the same thing. I wish I had my entire career in one place, but you know, you have to go where the good Lord leads you, and that's what I did. So my second job has been at WeatherBell. I do a lot of TV stuff. You see, you know, I was doing TV stuff at State College for a while, and but the stuff you see on Fox and things like that, that's quid pro quo stuff, and not really what I want to do. What I want to do is nail long range forecasts. And, I've always been into it, and that's what I do.
Hey, Joe, why Penn State instead of Texas A&M?
Well, Texas A&M was pretty far away. You know, we were in New Jersey, and you know, I always dreamt of going to Texas A&M and being a meteorologist and playing football for the Aggies. But, you know, it wasn't practical, and I didn't go to Penn State to wrestle. I got talked into walking on by the captain of the team I was good friends with, and I got the living daylights beat out of me. I took such a physical beating there the first year I walked on. I can't even believe I did that. I was like the checkerboard scarecrow. I had all black and blue marks on me because of the physical. I actually had you know, what happened was I wrestled in high school. I wasn't that good. And this guy talked me into walking on. Dumbest and smartest move I ever made in my life, because the way things have turned out is, you know, I look at all my closest associates now are my teammates and the wrestling coaches at Penn State, and wrestling has been very, very big to me. So what happened was I always use the line that I'm the only degreed wrestler ever to letter degree in meteorology. So I'm making this big speech at this old timers thing I was at, and some guy gets up, I said, Joe, I graduated from Penn State in 48. I wrestled for the Nittany Lions. I have a degree in meteorology. Not only that, but my pin of the guy from Lehigh won us the match, which is well beyond what I ever did, because Lehigh was always our rival. So I had to cut it off at 1950. It's like, that's the satellite era for me. But it is an interesting sport in that I went, it's very, very tough. You know, meteorology wasn't easy for me. Forecast of the weather, as my meteorology guidance counselor, Dr. Vince Olivero, and I think he's at Emory. He's at Emory now, I believe. He said, you know, a lot of people love the weather, but not everybody could be a Penn State meteorologist. And you know, what happened was, when I walked on that wrestling team, I'm exactly opposite of what people think about athletes. My grade shot up. I was like a machine for 3 years. I also had 5 radio stations that were, you know, paid me $25 a week to do the weather. I was always opening and closing the weather tower, so I had a job doing that, and I was wrestling also. But I had a blast. I was in Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Wrestling got me closer to the Lord. A lot of the reasons is there's no atheist in foxholes, which is what that was. Which is what that was to me. I had the team doctor in the middle of my first season. I had all this muscle, weightlifting muscle on me, and it was breaking down, because obviously wrestling muscle, weightlifting muscle, 2 different things. It was breaking down, so my creatinine and liver levels were high, and so in the mid-season when I had my physical, he said, well, your creatinine and liver levels are high. I said, is that something to worry about? He says, well, it means you're not recovering. You're not a good enough athlete to wrestle at this level. That's what he told me.
Oh, wow. Hey, let me pause you on something you said, because I think you're an encourager, right? You encourage people. I got a note recently from somebody who was trying to encourage a student who was having a difficult time with the really, really difficult math in meteorology. Yeah. What do you say to those? Help us encourage that guy and others.
It's all good. There must be opposition, and you know, I wish I was. You know, my son Garrett has had a lot of problems with it. My dad had a lot of problems with it at A&M. He had a tough time in calculus. I had a real tough time in calculus. I was blessed in that, again, when I started wrestling and I had good professors and good people around me, I suddenly got it that, you know, math is a language of science. And what we're trying to do, especially with integrals, is try to approximate things. And it's amazing when I look at weighting. I do a lot of weighting of analogs. I'm sitting there going, wow, I'm using some of the things that I didn't think I was going to be using. And it's a matter of motivation and maturation too. I mean, how bad do you really want it? You know, there's an intersection of talent and love and passion for it. And, you know, you could have I've always had tremendous lust for the weather. But now I love meteorology more. I'm just absolutely fascinated and blown away by all I'm seeing. It's the golden age for meteorologists and climatologists now, with all the in front of us. And so you have to be motivated by that thing. You know, Joe Paterno said it well, that it's not the will to win, it's the will to prepare to win. And, you know, when you let's say you've got this talent and you've got this love in meteorology, what I tell people is that, you know, you have to have gratitude to the good Lord above that you have that. You have to have humility to understand that you know, in the face of all this, you're very, very small. And you have to have that that belief that you must reach beyond your grasp when you're faced with things that are tougher and bigger than you. And it's a, you know, it's a very tough thing to do. Like I said, look, if I had not wrestled, if I had not been brought in that team, and all those guys were Knies majors, and I was the only. In fact, they used to take me on recruiting trips to show parents that there was actually some serious students on the wrestling team. so at least I got meals, extra meals. But the thing is that you have to make that decision. And man, I made it a game. I made it a personal battle. I made it such a, you know, I believe that the good Lord made me to do something and I was going to do it. And the advantage of wrestling was I was not a good wrestler, but I loved wrestling. In meteorology, because of my father and, you know, the things that came before, I knew I had talent to forecast. I knew I loved for weather. I said, okay, well, in this, I should do much better. But look, you know, I remember John Olivero saying, you know, hey, you could wind up pumping gas in Somers Point, New Jersey. And, you know, that's what could have happened. I could have flunked out. I had my back against the wall. But, you know, those things will make you better later on. So to the young person that's having the problem, look, this adversity is such that you have to embrace that adversity, and you have to make it so that you will remember it, have gratitude for it, and then you will continue to go forward. And that's how you advance. So, yeah,
You mentioned toward the end of your time at AccuWeather, are you able to say the things that you wanted to do that you were unable to do, or is that?
It wasn't anything like that per se. Look, AccuWeather is a great place. You realize, you know, the most
I'm not suggesting. I'm just saying you said there were things that were divergent.
The most underrated person that I think I've come across, as far as his influence on the field. I don't know. I go back and forth between Joe. It would have to be three of them: Joel, Elliott, and Joe Sobel. What they did was revolution. I mean, people were laughing at Dr. Joel Myers. He was on to tell. Do you know he was on to tell the truth? You know, because what his thing was to tell the truth was that he was going to start a weather service and people were going to pay him to make a forecast. That's how crazy that was. And so when we look at a lot of the things today and the innovations, the wording of forecasts, they've all been basically a situation that was started by someone that built something ground up. You know, it is very, very, very easy, comparatively speaking, to build something once it's already starting to get built. But the person that chops down the trees and starts it all, I mean, it's a remarkable thing. But you know, as I was so obsessed with nailing forecasts, and you know, I felt that that I was sort of looked at as a caricature of myself. It was all about the weather with me. It always was. And someone said something that really hit me. He said that Joe says what he says. Someone from the outside who was a dear friend of mine. Joe says what he says to get attention. I never do that stuff. I speak. You know, I wear my heart in my sleeve, and I say what I believe. And a lot of the things when people would see me on TV and all this other stuff, he's just putting that on, or it was never like that. And I realized that what did I want to do, and what did God make me do? You know, that's very important. You know, your young friend you were talking about, he has to decide what his mission is. You know, I do my mission. I have a certain mission in life. I have a certain mission that I bring every morning when I get up. I think about that. What were you made to do? Then go out and do it as hard as you can. And you know, so I had to consider a lot of different things that were going on. But I have nothing. There's nothing I can say when I look at the totality of the picture. Just, you can see I have a smile on my face because what I learned. You know what I do regret about my time at AccuWeather? That I was not the way I am now. I have this attitude. My father said you got to fight for everything. It's a man who can fight when he has nothing has a chance to fight for everything. Okay, so I had all this fight. You got to confront and do all this other stuff. And basically, I took my wrestling attitude into work a lot of times. And it would lead to friction. But I found over the last couple of years that if I'm the dumbest man in the room, if I actually say if I'm the dumbest man in the room, then I get to see everything, right? Because if you think you're the smartest guy in the room and you have to prove everything every single time, you're just going to be looking like this, and you won't see the very things that are going to come at you that can beat you. So I sometimes wonder, especially given my combative attitude, if I just sat back and just taken all of it in with the amount of knowledge, and you know, when you're forecasting, you're on the front line. I often say that what we do at WeatherBell is we are determined to show the why before the what, not after the what, and we are going to real-time battle test our ideas. We're going to put ideas out there, and we're doing that in our winter forecast. So we came up with an idea back last winter as to how this was going to go with the El Nino evolving and things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we want to do that. We want to get ahead with that. So I think that this attitude, you know, people say, you're just, you know, self-deprecating and trying to, but no, I have found that in the realm, in the face of the atmosphere, I'm nothing. I'm a dummy. Okay. And so when you look at it that way, then you're open to everything that's coming at you a little bit more. And when you're open to everything that's coming at you, whether it's a person that you disagree with or not, you're able to try to sit down and surmise things better. I think I have a lot more time to do that. In my company, WeatherBell, you know, I have a lot more, you know, if I showed you my office, I have a lot more space to sit here and just constantly focus on different things that are going on rather than worry about some other things that I had to worry about that, you know, that everything you have to pay a price for. So I think that's a big difference.
Did you listen to the Michael Lewis book, The Coming Storm?
No, I haven't heard that. You know, what's a little bit interesting is that in my attitude is that it's not that you know, it's very tempting when you have ego, an ego like I have, and my opinion is ego means edge God out. That's what that stands for. When you have an ego, you start. The toughest thing to do is when someone has another opinion, you start competing against that person rather than competing against the weather. You have to understand Look, the wrestling coach, head wrestling coach at Cale Sanderson at Penn State, we're really close to. And my wife works in the office, which is interesting because she was a gymnastics coach for 20 years. And, she's sort of in the office. She knows what coaches have to do. So she frees the guys up to actually coach. Okay. So she's got 3 national championship rings from wrestling. Here I wrestled. I don't have anything over here. I got this sweatshirt, and it's like
It's a good looking shirt.
Yeah, it's a nice looking shirt. But you first of all, you have to embrace adversity. Check your ego. You have to love your opponent, because if you love your opponent, you'll realize what his weaknesses are, but you also realize what his strengths are, and. You do something because you want to do it. Now, I believe God made me to do this, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And that gratitude has to come through. And you got to become a meteorological mongoose. Do you ever look at mongooses? Do they go after the little rabbits or whatever? No, they go after the king cobra snake. They will,
Wow.
the craziest thing, I would go into the office sometimes, and I can't stand when the weather's boring. In fact, some of the weaknesses I have is I'm always looking for trouble. And it's weird because when I went back and looked at what happened in the 30s and 40s and 50s, I started researching that stuff when I got to college because my dad was always talking about how bad the weather was when he was younger. I mean, yeah, sure, right. I went back, I go, oh my gosh, look what happened like this. So I'm frequently bored with the weather. I'm free right now. I mean, I don't think things. And what's crazy to me is if I were designing a curriculum for a climatologist, I'd make them long range forecasts for a year where they're doing 2, 3, 4 week monthly forecasts so they can understand. And what I would do is I design it so you would have to base that forecast based on the physical realities of what's going on. Yeah, I want to see your 5 to 10 best analogs and then your model defenses. Okay, I blend it all together, and you would come to realize that the weather is a standard six standard deviation negative. We've never seen this. Oh yes, we have. We've seen it plenty of times. It's like the Marilyn Monroe story. Remember, Marilyn Monroe comes back from Korea. She says, Joe. She says to Joe DiMaggio, Joe, you wouldn't believe it. You can't imagine what it's like 50,000 men screaming for you. And he goes, oh, yes, I can. Because he played at Yankee Stadium with 50,000 people screaming for him. Right? So what happens is I think a lot of things that go on today. And people say, well, this hasn't ever happened. And I'm sitting there going, if only it was as bad as it was before. My job is to look for trouble and supply the forecast for it. So I'm always looking for trouble. Getting back to it, so when the weather's boring, oh, yeah, we got a ridge over the eastern part of the United States and we don't have to work for a week. I'm like depressed, right? Like, you really want that? Is that what it's all about? Well, it's like a great wrestler. Don't want to wrestle. He wants to wrestle a top guy in his field, right? And, I wasn't a great wrestler, so I didn't really want to wrestle a top guy in the field. But in the weather, I'm always looking for something that, and it can get you in trouble because you're looking for things that may not be there.
So the El Nino buzz is growing.
Yeah.
Go ahead and go there.
Well, the Southern Oscillation Index, I believe that the warmer state of the planet is leading to greater lead times in long-range forecasting. I'm convinced that it's not that the individual events are that much more amplified. But for instance, we identified that since the middle 80s, the El Niños that have been developing, most of them are being tipped off the previous winter. And since there seems to be a cycle every 4 years, there seems to be an El Nino, it's very interesting watching the Southern Oscillation Index the previous winter. If you have a rapid drop in February or March, or January or February, from January, February, March, El Niños have developed the following winter. And so we had 2002, 2006, 2009, 2014. All those had, and it's explained in our winter forecast. So what happened was the year before, the multivariate ENSO index in 2017 was indicating strongly an El Nino was developing. In fact, it was up to 1.4 already in March and April that year. And then it just completely collapsed. And when I researched the Southern Oscillation Index that year, We didn't have a rapid drop, but we had it this year. And the significance of this, and I think is the reason you're seeing this, is because if you have some kind of long-term, 3-4 year cycle going on, it stands to reason if the sea surface temperatures are warmer in the Western Pacific, you're going to have a bigger pressure reaction to that during the winter season. And so it actually makes physical sense. And so that tipped us off to that. That immediately tipped me off to a wet March and April for California, which meant a big wildfire season. So we put that out. It also, we also lined up very nicely with 1962 as far as March and April. So we had a very cold March and April forecast. And assuming the El Nino was coming on, that then the way it was coming on, our analog forecast for the summer, that was one of our better forecasts. I mean, the summer turned out almost exactly the way we did. What we're doing at WeatherBell is we're trying to identify where storms are going to go. And so we put this red zone on, and we put it on in April, and that's where most of the storms went. So what happens is when this flows from one thing to another, the forecast verification is not only important for the verification, it means that you're on the right track to point you the next way. And I think that the warm state of the globe, which I think is largely due to increased water vapor, and I think people, if you study the mixing ratios, and John Kerr from Penn State told me this 15 years ago, and when I was bringing it up with him, he said, I don't remember telling you that. I said, Dr. Kerr, believe me, you had to tell me that because I'm too stupid to think of it by myself. But if you look at what water vapor actually does and actually means, you will see that very minute increases in water vapor will affect the temperature where it's coldest and driest. Temperature is not a linear measure of energy. A degree change where it's 80 takes much more energy than a degree change where it's -20, -30. In fact, if you jam 0.12 grams per kilogram of water vapor into the atmosphere where it's -40, once it's done precipitating out and you keep jamming that in, you're going to raise the temperature 10 degrees. So what's happening is all the major warming is in the coldest, driest areas during their winter season. So you're getting a distorted pattern, but it's all traced to the oceans. Now we can argue the oceans are, and here's where the argument starts, where the oceans are warming because of the influence of man, but that's kind of hard to believe since 99.9% of the thermal capacity of the planet's in the oceans, and there have been these long-standing cycles that have existed since time began. And you read Gray's writings on it. It seems that the ocean's pushing the air around, not vice versa. So it doesn't really matter, folks, where it's coming from. What matters is, does it give me a chance to forecast the weather better? And the argument over attribution has got people trying to choke each other out all the time. And I'm sitting there going, look, this is like arguing over the Yankees and Red Sox. If you want to say it's that, you know what, you might be right. And you know what? I have great sympathy, folks, for people on the other side of the global warming debate. I'll tell you why. Because do you realize the magnitude, if they are correct, that CO2 for the first time in the history of the planet is the climate control knob? Do you understand? That's like being Galileo of climate. I'm dead serious. I mean, if you have discovered that, how can you back away from that if you're convinced? But then again, where is your focus? Is it only on that one thing, or is it on the entire picture? So I look at things that way, but I have a great deal. Look, I get hung up on 10. If I have a 7 to 10 day forecast, let's say I'm forecasting a foot of snow in State College. Tell Garrett, there's going to be a foot of snow in 10 days. Until that storm is out to sea and it's sunny or it's raining, I won't give up on that forecast, right? Now, how much more for a person who's put 20 to 30 years of their life into this thing? Just think about that. Look, if this issue went away tomorrow, so what for me? It's still the weather. There's still what we have to deal with, right? It doesn't make a difference to me. But if it went away tomorrow for a lot of other people, it may make a big difference for them. So it's a very, very difficult thing. And I have an immense amount of respect and immense amount of sympathy for a lot of the great scientists on the other side of the issue. They got PhDs, but there are a lot of guys with PhDs on my side of the issue to do better in what we were made to do. So that's where my big bottom line is as far as that goes. And you know something, the best way to prove your point is to try to be right about something. And it goes back to what John Kerr said to me. You've got to explain the why before the what. That's what you're supposed to do. not wait till it happens. Oh, well, it's because of this or because of that. You know, you take, look, this hurricane season was beautiful. You have that cooling in the eastern Indian Ocean. What is that going to do? That's going to keep trying to force, in spite of the El Nino coming on, it's going to keep trying to force the MJO into 8, 1, perhaps 2. Those are great phases for tropical development in the Western Hemisphere. And you see it go crazy in the Eastern Pacific, and then it tries to work its way into the Atlantic. Well, the Japanese generated model, the JMA, which I look at religiously, on September 20th, it came out and said, there's going to be a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico in October. And that's a big thing for me, because if you ever notice what happens, back when I was on Sean Hannity's show on the 16th, the last day of Florence, I said, I'll see you in October. We're going to have a Gulf hurricane, I think. And the reason why is you can see the pattern evolving in there. So when you say, well, you're saying that after the fact, it's all out there. But the point of the matter is that if you're looking all over the place and you see that cooling in the Indian Ocean, you know what effect that's going to have on the Mann-Julian oscillation. Now, there's more. Why would you have something go on in October like that, right? You ever look at, if you look at the linkage, the hurricanes in East Coast and Eastern warmth, September and October, if that Mann-Julian oscillation goes into 8, 1, and 2, put that forward 2 to 3 months, goes into 8, 1, and 2 again, guess what happens? It's nice and cold and stormy across the United States. That's why if you go back and link October high ACE indexes west of 75, west north of 20, if you go back and link that, you'll find that Decembers are usually very cold in the southeast part of the United States. So we have an interesting test here, and that's what I love doing. I like to, see that over there? That might mean this over there. Let's go get it out there, and let's see if anybody's watching. So that was important. That was important.
Hey, Joe, I'm going to ask a nosy personal question here.
Yes,
you
sir.
Apparently went to dinner with Michael Mann. What did you two talk about?
Well, first of all, the Dr. Mann he's got a lot of passion. He believes what he believes because he's researched it. So how's that different from me, right? We talked about a bunch of things. We talked about, a lot of the things we did when we were kids. Some of the weather events when we were kids. We didn't really deal in. I suspect his politics are different from mine. I think we both see both sort of agree on a common end game. But what I wanted to talk to him about was I'd like to help teach a course at Penn State, a forecasting course, and it's going to be impossible for me to do that because of my global warming stance. And I paid a high price for that. And but what I wanted to get him interested in is that, look, if I tell you this, like I mailed him something the next day, I said, watch for a Gulf of Mexico tropical storm or hurricane within 10 days, right? Gordon came, right? Now, on August 23rd, we had that out to our clients, right? August 24th, I was meeting in Las Vegas, and I was, in fact, I believe we're going to pick up a client because I was talking to a guy in energy who believes, like I believe, that, well, the weather's not really going crazy. Goes, hey, take a look at this. No tropical development next 5 days. I said, you're going to get your stuff shut down a week to 10 days. You watch what happens, because the Japanese model, the JMA, comes out Thursday morning. That's another interesting thing. Nobody looks at that model. I should keep my mouth shut about it. Everybody's waiting for that Thursday night European, and I'm always looking at Thursday morning JMA. And I wish I could call those guys up and say, hey, I love you guys, But in any case, we talked about stuff. So what I wanted to do, and then Florence, I mailed them stuff on September 2nd. I said, you see that big ridge over the Northeast? Florence is coming back. But that happened 4 times. Every time that ridge popped over the Northeast, you had Alberto, you had Gordon, you had Florence, right? And then you had Michael, right? And
ridge over troubled water.
Ridge over the Newfoundland wheel. That's when the U.S. gets hit, right? We had a Simon wheel. We have Simon and Garfunkel hurricane season, the sound of silence, and then the ridge over troubled waters, right? The interesting thing about that is, even if Florence had turned out to sea, remember, a lot of models were taken out to sea, you probably would have had something try to form in there in that backer. By the way, what's fascinating with Florence, why did it weaken like that? There's all this warm water, and talk a Cat 6. And again, one of the interesting things, and like I said, I think I'm the dumbest man in the room, I need to be corrected. When I'm corrected, I will remember that. I don't like being wrong, so it leaves scars, right? So what I think happened was, and this is my argument for why we should seed hurricanes coming to the coast. This is the United States in 2018. We should, these big, powerful storms that are deepening coming to the coast, anything you can do to disrupt them, you'll throw them off. You'll throw them off. If you can mitigate a storm 4 down to 3, all right? Now, Project Storm Fury, I'm well aware of Project Storm Fury. I used to pray every night when they were going to seed those hurricanes. I remember Hurricane Debbie in 1969, listening to my Weather Bureau radio, and they were going, Project Storm Fury is seeding Hurricane Debbie. I'm going, please, God, don't let it weaken. What if they kill hurricanes, right? Like that. But they were seeding storms that were way out in the middle of nowhere, weren't that strong. I'm talking about the well-organized or developing storms coming to the coast where if you can disrupt the eye wall, look out. Now, what happened? What happened with Florence? Did you notice that the JMA predicted all this upward motion? Bang, all these tropical cyclones start going off. But that Thursday morning that Florence was still out to the east, the week 1 upward motion pattern showed it weakening considerably in the Atlantic. And it had the negative developing right over Hispaniola. So I'm looking at it going, that's not that big a deal. It's a big hurricane will come through it. But that means that there was large-scale subsidence occurring to the south and southwest of the storm. Drier air started showing up. Well, there's a big monster storm. It starts pulling dry air and disrupts the eye. Now, think about this. In the meantime, those spiral bands that are going out 200, 300 miles northwest of the storm over all that warm water, they don't know what's happening at the eye. What they're doing is they're continuing their convergence, and they are literally, and you see this happen, they are literally competing with the center of the storm for energy, right? Because the hurricane, you want it to tighten up, and you saw as it got closer to the coast, it began to tighten up again. Why? Because the bands that were going inland could not stay as strong. So it's fascinating watching that. So I wrote a paper or a blog right after that, put it out on September 17th. I said that this is the argument. The argument for seeding hurricanes is anything you can do to disrupt them. Think about this. If you had a 9-1 sprinter, right, and they tweaked their hamstring, they're no longer 9-1 sprinters. What are they? I mean, they're regular people. If I tweak my hamstring, who cares, right? The weaker the feature, the weaker the storm, the less effect land has on it. That's why you will see storms sometimes, tropical storms, 40, 50 tropical storms. They'll get inland and they'll just maintain intensity because if they have improving dynamics over the top of them, they have enough inflow, they can maintain 40, 50 knots or whatever. And you saw what happened with Michael, by the way, as it got close to Virginia Beach, right? It was playing possum over land. Bang, all of a sudden it starts lining it back up and the wind comes right back together again. So I think that, a powerful storm, and this would have been a good storm to experiment on because the HWRF was forecasting the big deepening in Michael, was forecasting big deepening coming to the coast. It would have been interesting to see if you can disrupt that and try to, you knock it down to a category 3 or whatever. You might be able to do something with it. Willa would not be a good storm to experiment on because the models are forecasting a 40 millibar weakening anyway with Willa coming to the coast, so you couldn't make a conclusion. So my idea, if you have an existing monster storm and it's coming to the coast, and you probably need a tight storm that's not at its maturity, that is going toward its maturity, you might be able to mitigate how strong the winds are.
What about that argument that says that if you mess with them, then you're disrupting the overall broader scale heat transport?
Well, I looked at that argument and I'm saying, okay, you want to make that argument, then okay, just have the 150 knot storm come ashore. I mean, you can you can step off a curb and get run over. I mean, my point, it's the same argument you see with the nuclear power industry. This is not Jane Fonda's China syndrome, the United States now. I look at, the whole darn CO2 argument can be made a moot point. James Hansen and I, we're opposite sides of the CO2 argument, but we agree on this. Why aren't we using more nuclear power? Oh, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. Well, you know what? We have a saying in Italian, solo rischiando tu vivere, which means without risk, there is no life, right? Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, and I may be totally wrong, yeah, you might mess up. You might mess something up. Someone may say, well, we would have only gotten 10 inches of rain, but we got 12 inches of rain over here. I mean, that's what will happen. But are we going to sit here and, maybe I'm being very cynical, but I think there may be a whole group of people that don't want to see storms weaken coming to the coast, that are rooting on stronger storms because they want to make a point about that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But it just seems that, like I said, this is the United States of America in 2018. And I think it's worth a try. But, if everybody thinks I'm wrong, then that's not going to happen anyway. So
what is the mechanism by which you would disrupt it then?
Well, with silver iodide seeding, try to take the convergence away from the center. All I'm trying to do is wreck the processes that are making the storm strong. Again, I'm not going to put a nuclear bomb into it. I would do the same things they did with Project Storm Fury, and see what kind of disruption of the eye wall you could have. As I understand it, what you try to do is you try to seed away from the storm to influence the convergence in those outer bands. And look, every time you see, for instance, remember Isidore and remember Gilbert, right? Those storms went over land and they never regained their intensity. It is extremely rare for a powerful hurricane to regain its intensity once it hits land. You could get a storm that's deepening like Katrina was, and Florida was a speed bump in its way because it's heading toward the area where it's going to be deeper. But if you want to really understand, if you hollow out the inside of a storm, if you destroy the eye, you don't destroy the outside of the storm. The outside of the storm is always going to compete with the reformation of the inside of the storm. And because of that, you can disrupt the storm. So I don't know why it's not worth a try. Again, it's one of these things.
What physical resources does it take? How many planes over how much time? How much material?
Well, you have to go back and look at Project Storm Fury. They would bomb storms for 24 hours. But if supposedly with each category you increase the amount of damage by 10%. Is that how that works? Or not? It's exponential. Like 4 is 10 times worse than 3. Right? Right. So
how many planes would you need? How much material would you need?
Well, these guys go have to determine. I'm just throwing the idea out.
I got you. I just was curious if you knew.
I go back and review Project Storm Fury and then try to set the same thing up for the next time a Michael shows up.
James can afford that. James, why don't you do that?
No, I've got the.
That's what that's going to set off.
What if Michael was heading from Mobile or Pensacola? All right, because where Michael went ashore was relatively unpopulated compared to Mobile and Pensacola, right?
Right.
You would have had $25-30 billion of damage. You mean to tell me that $50 or $60 million of seeding a storm is not worth the chance to knock that down by a few $1 billion? So I don't know, but you see, I'm not in favor of just sitting back and letting nature run rampant over top of us. I just think that it's time to try to consider powerful storms coming to the coast. Can we take the chance? It's one of these things of what you got to lose.
James,
Are there projects ongoing with seeding? I thought that stuff stopped decades ago.
No, this is just me saying this because I think that if you can disrupt the eye wall. We all know what eye wall replacement, when it goes through a natural cycle of eye wall replacement, it knocks the winds down some. Well, why don't we try to induce that?
James spends that kind of money on bad looking ties for TV.
Wow. Joe, how important are analogs in your seasonal outlooks?
They are very, very important. I'll tell you what's even going to be more important. I have to go and get my charger and put my charger on because I noticed my battery's down. So you guys talk for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute.
Time for the recorded elements.
Yeah, I'm about to say, let's take a break while Joe's doing that. We're going to play Tony Rice and the Astronomy Report. We're going to come back with more of Joe. We'll do the weather roundup, the picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Do you know where your moon rock is? In the months that followed Apollo 17's December 1972 return home, 185 fragments of lunar sample number 70017 that had been harvested from the moon's Taurus Littrow Valley by astronauts Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt were encased in lucite spheres about the size of a billiard ball. These Goodwill moon rocks were then mounted to a 10 by 14 wooden plaque and presented to heads of states of the then 135 countries, plus the 50 United States. A small flag of the state or country that also went to the moon and back was mounted along with the inscription, "Presented from the people of the United States of America, Richard Nixon, 1973. Once gifted, these were considered the property of the people of that state or country, and were no longer tracked by NASA, unlike other lunar samples, which are well documented. Former governors of Colorado, West Virginia, and Missouri took the rocks home with them when their terms were up. Each has since been recovered. Arkansas similarly found their rock in the gubernatorial archives. Canada's rock went missing. It was presented to Jamie Matthews, who was 13 at the time, and was representing his home and native land as youth ambassador at the Apollo 17 launch. He hung the plaque that was presented to Canada in his bedroom in rural Ontario near Detroit for a few months, where he showed it off to friends, before turning it over to the Museum of Natural Sciences in Ottawa in 1973. It was displayed there for about 5 years, and then things get a little fuzzy. Canada lost their rock for about 3 decades, when it went missing in a museum warehouse reminiscent of the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was found again in 2009 and has been on display at the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa ever since. So, where can you see your state's rock? If you're in New York or Delaware, you're going to have to visit a neighboring state. The whereabouts of New York's Goodwill moon rock are unknown, and only the plaque remains from Delaware's after a thief removed the rock. Alabama residents, you can see your Goodwill moon rock at the Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery. You can also see a sample returned from Apollo 12 at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville. Similarly, each NASA center across the country has at least one on display. You can even touch a piece of the moon in Houston, Washington, and Cape Canaveral. Speaking of Washington, D.C., residents there are never more than 6 miles from a moon rock on display. I checked. There are 15 samples spread amongst the National Geographic, National Air and Space, and the Smithsonian Natural History Museums. It's actually 16 if you count the bit of moon rock that's embedded in one of the stained glass windows at the National Cathedral. Tar Heels can also see their Goodwill moon rock at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, after it was recovered from a professor's desk drawer in NC State. Just across from it, you can touch a piece of Mars, brought back to Earth in meteorite form. You can find links to the known locations of the Apollo 17 Goodwill rocks, as well as displays from other missions worldwide, in a post on alabamawx.com. Just search on moon rock. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokey for more spacey stuff like this.
So, Aubrey, by chance, you want to do some email here by chance?
Oh, no, I am not ready.
Well, in that case, we'll hold that until maybe 15 minutes from now.
I will pull it up.
So let's do a quick weather roundup. We'll take a break. We'll come back to talking with Joe. Joe, we're going to kind of go around what's happening around the nation here. We're doing the show on October 22nd. We got Willa. Joe, your thoughts on Willa coming up? Looks like it's going to weaken up as it gets closer to the coast.
Well, I think it is. I think its energy is going to dissipate very quickly over those mountains. But I also think that 500 millibars, some of that energy is going to come out in Vicente. Also is going to feed into this monster that's going to be along the eastern seaboard this weekend. So we're going to get Gulf development. And I think we're going to get a tree-snapping snowstorm in the high ground from West Virginia all the way on up into New England here on the western side of this, which, by the way, is analoged closely to 77, 2002, 2009. Both, all three of those years, there were some heavy wet snows in the mountains as El Niños were starting to come on. It's very interesting how that linkage occurs. But as far as Willa, I read this stuff today, and this is how crazy things are getting. I read something today where Willa's rains are going to affect, this migration northward. And I'm like, how is that even possible? What are they going to do? They're all going to get in cars and drive as fast as they can to Mazatlan from Guatemala or something? I mean, there's all sorts of crazy things that are going on today as far as trying to blame the weather. You'll find that every single flake of snow that falls in the Northeast this weekend or drop of rain that leads to any kind of flooding from Mexico to Mussolini is going to be blamed on Willa. I once saw a situation where Hurricane Allen was going into South Texas, and there were forecasters arguing whether it was going to the remnants were going to turn east or west. So there were forecasts for the remnants of Allen in Albuquerque and Atlanta at the same time.
That was
Now-
1980, right?
Joe, when you say 2009, that scares me going into winter of 2009, 2010.
Yeah, no, this winter has all the makings of a tremendous southern and eastern winter. I mean, you've got a very nice setup for a Modoki El Nino. You have the very warm water in the Gulf of Alaska, which promotes a lot of ridging across northwest Canada. And you also have, what I'm fired up about is what's going on in the eastern Indian Ocean. I like that cool pool there because that tends to cut the feed out from the MJO going into 4, 5, and 6. And if you guys are, I'm one of these MJO nuts, right? I know enough about it to just cause me problems. But 4, 5, and 6 are the kiss of death for the eastern part of the United States with snow and cold. And what's fascinating is at WeatherBell, Joe DeLeo, who's like the Moses of meteorology, he's one of my partners, and Tom Downs. I'm surrounded by geniuses on below and above me. But Joe does a lot of anti-logging, which he will get the exact opposite pattern, and then look at it, what that reveals, and then flip it. And two of the big anti-logs this year are 2001, 2002, and 2011, 2012. Those were both non-winters.
Mm-hmm.
So the anti-log to them is very good. But, like, for instance, in your area of the country, we have a winter of 3 below normal, and we have 133 to 150% of normal snowfall there. So let's say a monster year did occur. I would think that the way I grade forecast is, especially with snow and cold, is I punish myself more if it's warmer than if it's colder. In other words, suppose it's a degree or two warmer than what I've got forecast, that gets graded more severely than if it's a degree or two colder, because especially in light with what conventional wisdom looks like, you don't want to you want to have the cold be colder than what you have if you're going to make an error, because you don't want people accusing you of hyping something to make their point. But
Joe, I'm in Wichita Falls. What do you have for us?
I have you guys about 2 to 3 degrees below normal, above normal snowfall there. I think it's going to snow all the way to I-10 again this year.
Wow.
2 years in a row.
San Antonio.
And the way that happens, well, New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Alabama and Georgia. I like a snowy. The way that happens is every winter there's going to be a snow threat. But if you have 7 or 8, chances are you'll get 2 or 3, and that's more than normal snowfall. I mean, what's the normal snowfall in Birmingham? 1.4. What is it there, right?
It's about 1.2.
1.2. So all I need is 1 2-inch storm. Whatever. But the point is to get out in front. Well, look, you give people a general idea, and you put out a forecast on August 7th that is quite cold and quite stormy, and then you try to hone in as you get closer. Now, it's interesting in that when you look at the European generated seasonal forecast, it's the best I've ever seen the European. It was like God let me draw it. And then after he let me draw that one, he let me draw the JMA, because that was better. I mean, the Japanese meteorological agency winter forecast looks like some of the great winters in the late 70s. So we're talking about the entire country cold. And you can see how that happens. If you have that cool pool around Australia, and you have the center of the warmth in the Pacific more toward the date line and towards South America, the upward motion patterns are such that you argue for the big trough to be centered maybe near 40 north and 160 west, a lot of ridging to the northeast of that over Alaska. And then the jet responds by putting a trough in the southeastern part of the United States. The reason those strong El Nino winters are so warm is because when the water's warm further east like that, when the water's very warm all the way to NSO 1.2, the strongest upward motion is drawn in toward the western part of the United States. So you tend to have much more trough coming, extending into the western United States, which tends to put the ridge over the Great Lakes, which of course would be the kiss of death. And that's why the Super Niño years like 82 and 97 and you look at the 2015, 16 years, the blend of those are very warm. But let me tell you something: the average El Nino, if you averaged all the El Ninos, they're cold in the southern and eastern part of the United States. This idea that the El Nino is just a warm signal, with a super El Nino, that's true. But the weaker the El Nino and the later it starts, the more likely it is to be cold and stormy.
So you think we're looking at a weaker El Nino then, as opposed to a stronger one?
We have it going to between 0.9 and 1.3, and let's remember also, this was made back in spring, based on the SOI. And what I'm excited about, I'm just excited the El Nino's coming on, because what we call multivariate ENSO index is the gold standard of ENSO forecasting, and it still says there's no El Nino coming on. And look, it's amazing. It's amazing being where I am in the climate situation. I'm sitting there, and nobody on my side of the issue wants an El Nino to come on, because you know what that does? It warms the global temperature. And look, and I don't care where you are in this debate. Guess what? In the wake of the last El Nino, the current global temperatures are warmer than we've ever measured in the satellite era. I keep seeing all this stuff about this is the biggest temperature drop we've ever seen. Yeah, well, why? Because it got so warm. It was at 0.8 C above the 30-year mean. So you have to be realistic about that. As a forecaster, I have to take that into account. Now, here's what's fascinating. Between the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle, global temperatures are normal, maybe a little bit below. It's all in the Arctic and Antarctic regions that you're piling all this up. And when they say, oh my gosh, the Arctic's melting, most of the warming is occurring during the winter season up there, which is absolutely golden if you like snow in the eastern part of the United States, because it means every year there's going to be some kind of block somewhere. You just have to figure out where it's going to go. And we like where it's going to go this year. So that's why I'm excited about the winter forecast. By the way,
Joe, your biggest forecast bust, seasonal bust.
Oh, 11, 12 was bad. 05, 06 was bad. In fact, that just February of 2017. I mean, I was literally because the MJO went into phases 8, 1, and 2, and I thought it was going to get real cold. And the 500 millibar responded, but the low levels didn't. That was as destroyed as I've ever been about busting, because and it taught me a lot. It taught me a whole bunch of stuff that you can't just, you got to play with the physical realities of the initial conditions. And I believe that the global wind oscillation, some of these other things are affected to some extent by the warmth of the planet. And I also believe that it's lowering the total zonal potential energy. You can see that going on. The max temperatures aren't increasing. The min temperatures are getting higher. What does that imply? Your range is not as great, right? So if we go up in the Arctic and the Arctic's not quite as cold and you're not warming further south, what does that imply about the temperature gradient, right? So some of these things are positive. So what I've done is, again, I've pulled myself back over the past couple of years and said, instead of thinking you're smarter than everything, why don't you assume you're dumber than everything and open yourself up to every single thing, then do the work and wait the drivers in front of you and see what happens. And since then, very often when I'm corrected, and I have some sense of humility about it, it leads to very positive situations. That's why I don't respond or get on blogs or anything like that, because it's just like, you get into these pitch fights on the blogs, and it's like, you get distracted, and there's nothing I can do about everybody else around me. If you react to what everybody's saying, you become their puppet. So I'm well aware of busts. What absolutely drives me nuts? Missing an end game to a storm. Like Florence, the two things. I thought Florence was going to be stronger coming in. On September 2nd, and you guys saw that on Twitter. September 2nd said this is coming back. And September 5th, that was the first landfall. The landfall forecast was great. I just kept the same thing. It was like with Sandy, right? But I thought it would be stronger. And again, I got corrected. the atmosphere corrected me. I said, I see what's going on now. But then I tried to, bit a little bit too much on the European, trying to take it down the South Carolina coast a little bit too much. That drives me absolutely nuts, like when that happens. But I remember it all the time. I have a sign over my squat rack. I have two signs. One says, if God stands with me, who can stand against me? I have to remember that when I'm lifting. But the other one says, I don't remember my wins, I remember my losses. So what happens is that kind of thing. And in the weather, when you're facing this relentless opponent, you are left with scars that never heal. I mean, but they're good because they remind you of things that went wrong. And when you get reminded of things that went wrong, you tend to open your mind to other things that are going on. So 05, 06 was real bad. 01, 02 was the funniest bust I've ever had. I ran into this Amish farmer, and we had a warm, dry October. And I says, hey, you ready for winter? He says, not going to be much of a winter this year. So I says, is that so? Well, I'm a meteorologist, blah, 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 blah. And, my long range forecast is for a cold winter, 2001, 2002. And he says, my horses don't have any hair. We're not going to have much of a winter. I'm like, well, guess what? I think we were 5 with 17 inches of snow. It was a non-winter. But you know what I did? I went and researched it. Warm, dry Octobers in State College, Pennsylvania, generally have warm, dry winters behind them. Now, why is that? Again, let's go back to Mann-Julian oscillation being in a certain position and what it produces, right? Well, if you go look back at 01, 02, for instance, you had you were in the warm phases, and the winter tended to repeat those phases. So it's fascinating. Years later, this story continues. 3-4 years later, I'm in a McDonald's with my kids, and this Amish lady walks in with her sister. And I guess her sister had left the sect. I don't know, whatever. But she walks in there, and her 3 kids come over, and my 2 kids are sitting there. You know how you could play around McDonald's. So I says to the oldest young Amish boy, I say, "Hi, Jakey. How are you doing?" He goes, "How did you know my name was Jakey?" I said, because I know that a lot of Amish people named their first boy Jacob. So I was just, introducing her to my kids, and Jacob wrestled the angel. If you're a wrestler, you love Jacob. Okay. So in any case, she comes over, the mother comes over, and I'm terrified. And she goes, "Why are you talking to my children?" I said, blah, blah, blah. I explained it. And she goes, okay. And I said, "Hey, what do your horses look like?"
That's the show title.
Yeah, exactly.
I go, she says, "We don't have horses, we have mules. Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, because I'm a meteorologist." And she goes, "You're a meteorologist. What do they do? What do you do?" And I go, "I forecast the long range for AccuWeather." And she goes, "I've never heard of them." And get away from me, spawn of Satan, because the Amish, first of all, they have TV, so they've never heard of AccuWeather, right? I'm playing the AccuWeather card on someone who's never heard of AccuWeather, right? Don't you know who I am? And the second thing is, the Amish, they don't care about tomorrow. I mean, we had a snowstorm here in November 1995, knocked all the power out, and the Center Daily Times was going, everybody was affected by the power outage except the Amish. Right? I mean, it's unbelievable. No joke, right?
Right.
I absolutely love the Amish. I love talking to them, and they're really they're these are the toughest people on the face of the planet. So it's cool to talk to them. I've tried to now see what I did. I can't afford horses. I got guinea pigs back here. All right. and those guinea pigs will tell me what the weather's going to do, except I can't translate them. Right. And of course, the farm across the street over here, the kid came over. He wanted to take care of my lawn, mow my lawn. So I wake up one morning, there's all goats out on my lawn.
Show title.
We're mowing the lawn
Wow.
and fertilizing it at the same time, right?
Kevin, we've had 18 different show
Easily.
titles.
Yeah, we
This is
don't have
great.
the show title until summer of next year.
The problem is that I have 12 different personalities, so even when I'm alone, I'm never alone.
Wow.
Hey, Joe,
Joe, go, Ken.
I was just going to say, I had to step away from it. I'm sorry. What is the business model of WeatherBell? I mean, we have an account here at the station, and thank you for it because we use it every day. But that can't be the main source of income. Little losers like me with a little small account, or what is it?
It actually is a very large. You get several thousand people on it, and we do. Look, and you got Mick, Kevin, that. I'm not putting pretty computer models up there. I'm showing a lot of stuff behind the scenes that. Right.
I just figured you had big. The bigger chunk must be
energy companies, retail companies, hedge funds.
Wait, say them again. I stepped on you.
Well, we have retail. We have big box companies. We have snow fighting companies. I have energy companies. And I love wind and solar. Okay. Yeah. I love everyone. So we have across the board.
Explain why those people want account like a retail person wants what?
Well, he wants to know if it, for instance, this weekend. Suppose you're a big box company, and we're already getting you ready for the possibility of a tree snapping snowstorm in the mountains over here, and they may be a day earlier in positioning if it's going to come. So if you could give someone an edge up, or how about all the energy companies in the Gulf of Mexico, if they know there's going to be a 2 or 3 day shutdown, disruption of activity, and where to position their people. So it's one thing after another. Here's
do the retailers come to you like in the spring and say, we need to know how many sweaters to buy and stuff like that way out ahead?
We do that. Listen, what I do is I don't really get involved in the business aspect at all. I put out the forecast. And the guys said, what we're really doing now is we're building a lot of platform for the distribution of our maps, to media. We're doing a lot of media stuff and trying to get that out. But I don't know exactly. By that, I mean, I am not a businessman. I'm the guy that invented the tornado in a bottle, 1982. That tornado in a bottle that you see out there, I had it registered in the patent office in 82. Dr. Ken Hakuda, who brought the wacky wall walker over here. Remember that, right?
Yes.
I was interested in it. I was written up in the Wall Street Journal. This is going to be the next big toy. Nothing came of it. Why? Because I'm a dummy with business. I'm just a man. That's it. Mongo, just pawn in chess game of life. So you could call Mike Shanahan and our CEO, but we're basically got a lot of energy companies. We want to give our energy companies up. We want to give our retail companies up. Salt, my salt companies on the East Coast love me. Okay, they honest to goodness. I mean, it gets kind of strange because if I miss a storm, they'll say, don't worry about it. I'm not used to hearing that because we've had so much snow on the eastern seaboard. I have another big year forecasted for them. So if you go buy up all the salt in August,
right,
telling you that, guess who the state of New Jersey has to come to when they run out of salt?
That's what I was curious about, like on the seasonal, is salt or retail or whatever.
The weather has its tentacles in everything
right.
You can say. So I can't give you out our client list, but there's other stuff that's going on too. And we're a lean, mean machine. We have 8 to 10 people working, and I don't ever envision it's getting to be one of these big things. And I think that there's a focus. And see, the interesting thing about WeatherBell, someone said, well, I remember being on with Dr. Shepard. I was on Weather Geeks, and it was just a wonderful time talking to him, being over there. And he said, well, do you have any women working with you? And I said, well, we'd love to. We'd love to. But the problem is with an outfit like WeatherBell, we're all freaks. No, we're not. Joe DeLeo,
wow.
Tom Downs. Tom Downs. We all work 60 to 70 hours a week, and we work every day. We don't really care. This is what God made. We have this attitude. This is what God made us to do. We're going to do as hard as we can. Our guys that are building our platforms, these guys work constantly. So what happens is it's not a regular job when you're building a company. And see, this is the interesting thing in the field. Loving the weather. I wrote that book, The Climate Chronicles, for anyone who want to get on and look at it. It's a love story. Now, defending defending my methodology against what is an onslaught of things that have, in my opinion, don't have much to do with the weather and climate. But the point of the matter is, I've been in love with this since I was 3. I mean, you know, my wife never has to worry about me. You know, my pinups when I was a kid were Cleo and Betsy and Inez, the eyes of the hurricanes, you know. And when kids were waiting for Sports Illustrated, I was waiting for WeatherWise. Do you understand?
Wow.
So
I just want to say real quick, you have amazing reviews on your book. I was pulling it up on Amazon, and you've got pretty much a 5-star review on your book.
There was one, and I usually answer everybody. I haven't gone on look lately, but I was one going, all he did was rehash his blogs. I go, I don't understand. That's what I told you the book was. All I did was get all the blogs I wrote and organize them in a fashion, a little bit of a fashion. But the point of the matter is that different chapters saying, this is not really what you think it's about, you know, and that's what I think.
So on the corporate thing, and don't tell me, I don't want names, but as far as what 1 or 2 or 3 industries subscribe to your service that would just blow us away and go, what? Those people need weather information?
Oh no, I think this. I'm speechless here because there's energy.
Yeah.
You
can figure that out. Trucking.
Yeah. There's retail.
Yeah. What else? But are there any crazy ones, or
any
big
surprises?
Yeah, big surprise. If there's not, there's not. I'm just curious.
There may be. I had the biggest de-icing company in Europe for quite some time, but that's natural. But what we also want to do is we want to get a media presence out there. We want the maps being distributed, you know, to different TV stations, and that's starting to go now also. But as far as listen, I think there are 3 million weather nuts in the world. I really do. I think there are 3 million people who are as nutty as me that can't live without the weather, and I don't know what I do without the weather. So we try to get to them.
What are the TV things that you want to supply us with maps or what?
Oh yeah, that's what's going on. You'd have to talk to our chief salesperson, Mark. You should see at meetings. You know, when we have our meetings, we have our weekly meetings. I'm sitting there listening, and it's all going over my head until the weather part comes. But they're getting out there. They're working. They're working.
Who? Mark Taylor? You said?
Mark Taylor. Do you know Mark Taylor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
we all know Mark Taylor. He's a legend.
I ran into Mark at a bar.
There's the guy to talk to right there, right? As far as what's going on with that.
So let me ask you this: how is WeatherBell doing since Ryan Maui left?
Well, we're obviously standing. I mean, I don't. You got me trapped because I don't know what to say about that. You know,
we're just talking between us girls here. There's nobody but us.
No, the thing is, Ryan's a brilliant scientist, and he has to do what he has to do, so he left. Now, I will tell you this, that a lot of the stuff that we are doing now that he developed is going to disappear very quickly, and a whole new platform's coming out.
You heard it here on this show first.
No, well, I'm sure people know that, but you know the thing about Ryan is, again, and it's something I say. I'm not knocking people that love the beauty of the maps. They're beautiful maps, but you have to in my world, you have to forecast. You can't just say, okay, well, let me analyze this and analyze that and analyze this, and you know, a week away. You don't say anything about it. And then when it shows up, you say something. I'm not knocking Ryan. I'm just saying, in general, what I do, you know, I might occasionally throw on the European or whatever on a blog, but I've got stuff up in front of me now that I just prepare for my clients, and I'm just looking at every week during November of 2002, and I've paralleled it to the European. So I go back and I try to give people who are watching me something they're not seeing, or they can't just get on a site and click on. You can't just get on a site and click on, well, in 1963, right? We had a certain type of pattern and it resembles this. Or you can't get on and just click the various analogs that I do and the way I come to my analogs. For instance, did you like that in the winter forecast, looking at South America, right? You look at South America. When South America has cold winters down there during our summer season, obviously, and El Niños are coming on, usually Decembers are cold in the United States early. And when they're warm, winters tend to arrive late. Now, you guys, I don't know, maybe that's common knowledge. You know what's funny? You know that typhoon rule everybody uses now?
Yeah.
I was being laughed at in the 90s when I was using that all the time. People said,
What is the rule?
Well, the rule is when it recurves, you look for a trough in the east, the central part of the United States, 6 to 10 days later. When it moves west, the ridge is coming back into the eastern part of the United States. So, but what happens was I didn't figure that out. Norm Macdonald gave that to me, not the comedian, the Norm Macdonald, the meteorologist, right? And he got it from World War II forecasters who, after they came back, gave it to the guys at Caltech and MIT, and they perfected the rule. And yet I'm sitting here going, well, wait a minute, these guys are a lot smarter than everybody else, right? How come I'm being laughed at simply regurgitating that? And so what I'm saying is I try to show people things they may not see in other places. Why come to us if I'm just going to sit there and just, well, look at this. The GFS has the storm out to sea. You take the storm on the weekend, you see the GFS is trying to drive it out to sea, right? Well, does that make sense given the upward motion pattern of the Japanese, the warmth of the water, and the fact that the trough is deepening back over Kentucky? It's more than likely that storm's going to try to hug the coast and come straight northward, right? And yet you see the GFS out to sea. Well, we could put that on and say, hey, look at these pretty colors. They're way out at sea, but look from the ship.
All right,
I have to go, guys.
Yeah.
I do have to go.
Want to do email real quick? Or
I can't. I've got to head into the studio. Otherwise, they get mad at me if I'm not in there. I know.
Okay.
I know, but we'll do an extended email segment next week, and I'll do it early so I don't have to go.
All right, gotcha, Aubrey. Thank you. And listen, Joe, Kevin and I have the same problem. We have to do the LA. I wanted to talk to you about all kind of stuff here. We're just getting started, and we got to cut this thing off.
Well, let me just say something, James. If I could have wrestled the way I talk, I would have been a national champ. You know, it's kind of weird, Kevin. You stumped me. You got to understand, I don't pay attention to anything but the weather. You know, it's. And you asked me about what our company's doing and this and that, or you asked me about Ron. I don't really pay attention. I am just totally focused and grateful to the good Lord above for what I got a chance to do.
No, that's fine. We're just, if you knew and could share, that's fine. But look, your passion is infectious, and it helps all of us, and we appreciate you.
People have been inoculated, but people are saying that they should be inoculated against me, and I sort of agree with that. I think you should talk to Mark Taylor sometime about.
Yeah, we should get Mark on the show.
You should, yeah. Well,
he has a long, rich history as well.
Well, he's he went to Grove City College, so that's a pretty impressive place.
Well, he's been around. He's seen a lot of things. I mean, our business is changing, no question. And I think we need to get him on the show.
That's the WeatherBell chief salesperson right there. Yeah. So there's the guy.
So I got to go. Joe, thank you for your passion. We appreciate it.
Joe, plug away. Plug books, WeatherBell, anything you want to plug. Go. This is your plug time.
Folks, if you want to know the why before the what, or my interpretation of it, try to come over to weatherbell.com. If the commercial side, you get a really advanced, in-depth stuff, and the premium side, you're going to get some of my joking around and messing around because I like to play around. But you're also going to get a lot of things, like, for instance, the angle on the winter that you may not have seen or heard before. As far as the book is on Amazon. It's called The Climate Chronicles, Inconvenient Revelations You Won't Hear from Al Gore and Others. It is the first book I've written, and the second book I'm writing is called Against the Wind, The Journey of a Mad Meteorologist. So I'm that's going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, I forgot to when you're in Alabama, because I was down there, when was I down there most recently? I was in Destin back in the winter. So I went through Alabama. If the word James Spann comes up, that name, you have to genuflect. So
oh, please. I'm just old. But Joe, you've been, and again, your passion for the science is, as Kevin said, infectious. it spreads. You know, if you can be chronically negative, it spreads like a cancer. On the other hand, when you're positive and excited about the science, it spreads as well. So thanks for what you've done for the science.
I have gratitude. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, gratitude to my Heavenly Father and for giving me a chance. You realize all the people I've met. I can't even believe the people I've met through this. So, if I thought 20 years ago that I'd be talking to you here, I'd be like, what are you, nuts? Well, I am nuts, but you know what I mean. So.
Yeah, we're all nuts to some degree. Joe, I got to go do the news. Thank you so much. It's been a great guest. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Joe. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks a lot. All right, so we are going to wrap this one up. And again, we did not get the picks of the week, but they're going to be on the website, weatherbrains.com. So go over there and you'll get a chance to see them. Most of us have picks, but we just ran out of time. Normally, somebody's on the show here that doesn't have to do a late newscast, but we all have to do one. So here's the deal. We typically do the show every Monday night at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. And most folks watch it live and they have a lot of fun. And most of you listen, though. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address is email@weatherbrains.com. We promise we'll do a quadruple email segment next week, and our social media accounts are there as well, plus the show notes, all the things we talked about this week. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Okay, thank you all. I would love to stick around, but I got to go. Going to Boston World Series, Game 1 tomorrow night. The Red Sox versus the Dodgers will be the guys in center field on row 27 freezing to death. Now, we'll see y'all next week. Y'all have a great week. Bye-bye.